Welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. I am Jeff Hillemeyer, and with my friend Alex Gonzalez, we explore topics that help you be your best self. And we also get to chat with some great guests. So join us now on the Jeff and Alex podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. I'm Alex Gonzalez. I'm here with Jeff Hillemeyer. Good morning, Jeff.
How's it going, Alex?
Oh, pretty good. Another early weekend morning where we get to, instead of playing golf or do something like that, we get to talk to each other virtually on a worldwide podcast.
I always love seeing which kind of Atlanta brands you're going to be repping on these.
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with it. Today I realized I need to update my closet and, maybe represent our friend Melissa, product a little bit more or something. But yeah.
Get some Hawks jerseys. Yeah, no, I've got enough of these Black Dragon Army shirts. I pretty much.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, is it? Do you have a lot of them, or is it the same one, and you're just not telling anybody?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to hide that fact on in the virtual world. No, yeah, I have so many of them, and just takes one less decision off the table in the mornings.
Well, I am repping a little bit of the, because I don't have, you don't give me Dragon Army shirts, just mugs. So, so I do have the Dragon Army mug here today.
I got some coming away then.
It's like I said to everybody out there, I am a shameless commercial, and I'll put everybody's mug. Now they still have to look good. I will say that I have received some, those. There's some of mugs and stuff like that you get that just look like, you just went to the website and just printed it off, and it looks so commercial. So this looks pretty good. I like the two-tone element of it. So yeah,
it's a nice hefty mug you got.
Yeah, it's a hefty mug and all that. But but I'm a little bit of a mug snob, I guess it could be. So Jeff, we are as we talk about this, into the holidays, obviously, and so happy Thanksgiving, by the way.
Yeah, same to you.
And but one thing I was thinking about is this time of year, for going to Thanksgiving, but then going to the Christmas break, to me it's like a reset time, and it's kind of be thinking in terms of the importance of unwinding, and I think there's a whole range of it, from just your daily unwind to frankly completely unplugging to even sabbaticals, which maybe we could talk a little bit about that as well too. But let's start talking about that too, because I think it's so important for a leader, whether just in your daily grind or even if you're not in a leadership role, the unwinding aspect, unplugging aspect is so important. So I'm gonna start with you, Jeff. How do you unwind, and even maybe on a daily basis, if that exists?
Yeah.
How do you unwind and help yourself reset?
It's changed a bit during COVID and quarantine, I think. I have found that I need to take, if I'm in front of a screen for more than a couple hours, especially on video, I'll do a walk, or I'll leave the computer and go and hang out with the kids, because they're all around the house. So it's definitely changed for me from that perspective. When I was a younger entrepreneur, it was real hard to make sure that I had time away from the business. It's just like all consuming. So I find there's a couple of my kids that like walks as well. I'll try to grab them, go for walks. I know there's a couple of shows we both watch that I think also just help you escape reality a little bit, but I think it's important. How about you? And I'm curious, from your perspective, when you were, more in the corporate setting, and then now where you're sort of civic and entrepreneurship, like, how do you think about unwinding and disconnecting?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple discussions there. One, going to what you just mentioned, is kind of the daily unplug. First of all, going back to what you mentioned with COVID, I think it's real important right now. First of all, if you're fortunate enough to be able to work from home and all that, you do have this unique element of being zoomed out. And by the way, Jeff, I think right now, not so much for our show, because we're unique escape and entertainment, so I'm sure everybody watches every second. But I think as we get into end of the year here, one thing I've noticed is for people who are in roles that require you to be in front of a screen, people are just burned out with it, and it's also, I think, even just the work from home environment, particularly in the corporate setting and all that, has caused people to almost work longer. They start at 7:30 a.m. in the Zoom and go on, because it's almost, I think there's a psychological element where you just stay engaged, and there's all these conferences, and next thing you know, you find yourself, you're in front of the screen for 10 hours. So just going back to the immediate, being deliberacy in terms of, I'm going to end and not feel guilty at, whatever time, and I'm going to completely put this stuff aside and kind of go on, spend time with my family, watch shows or whatever. That's important now. But yeah, no, in terms of the, corporate was hard. I mean, I think it's, of course, depending how you approach work or anything like that. Similar to what you're talking about entrepreneurs, I mean, it's hard to turn off. I mean, particularly in these senior roles. I mean, it is a 24/7 gig. You're always thinking about the next day. So there was a little bit of just like now, some intentionality when you got home. And I tell you, I just think back of it, how 24. I mean, I'll tell you, Jeff. It's when I kind of stepped away from corporate for a while. There was a decompression of months because you didn't realize how much 24/7 you were with it. So the daily disconnect was probably the hardest one, and then a lot of it was really invested in whether it's a weekend or kind of the or vacations or something like that. But now in this world, it's it's a little bit more disciplined to be able to do that too.
When you think about stepping away or taking some time, is it to sort of catch your breath and recalibrate? Is it to have some time to think strategically? Sort of the forest through the trees type thing. When you look at that, how do you decide which you're going for?
Yeah, to me, I mean, I think there's the one pure, which I think people don't talk enough about. And I think hopefully overall we're getting better in terms of talking about mental health. Just mental health is just first and foremost, right? And which includes being able to make sure you stay connected with your family or your loved ones, whomever it is, because it's these roles, whatever you're in, could be so demanding. Then sometimes, as you kind of pop up and realize how disconnected you may have been. But to me, I think a lot of it then, when it comes back from a work perspective, it is about that reset and to be able to think strategically and creatively. And I think it's important for that reset to occur. So, I mean, to me, if you're thinking strategically and innovatively, you need to let dots get connected. And if you're in a constant state of not urgency, but constant state of almost, putting out fires, things just never connect. And, because you're going on to the next problem so quick before you even solve the one before. And think so to me, I think a lot of it is letting it reset. Which may not be, maybe spending some time not thinking about work, because I think that's important, or it's all of a sudden shifted in what part of your brain, work is kind of kicking around in.
Yeah. Well, I've seen one of our good friends, Mike Popowski, CEO of Dagger. He, ever since he started running that company, I think it's been 5 years now. He would have small little sabbaticals that he would take with an effort to step outside the business and really think. And I think it was on one of those sabbaticals he came up with butter.
Yep.
Which everyone should follow on Instagram. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
but it's
incredible
it's
success story, by the way. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a media company that was spun up inside of an agency, but he's really done a good job with that. He's also lives a different life. He's got one kid in college. I've got 5 kids in school,
not in college.
Not in college yet. And so when he goes away for 3 or 4 days, I think he really does get a chance to escape. And so just different stages of life. But have you ever really taken a sabbatical, even if it's a small one, to give yourself time to think? Or has it been, family vacation type thing?
It's interesting, and there is a difference. I think your kids are younger. So one of it, just going back on that, the whole concept of sabbatical, and that's something a little bit more now that I'm focused on, particularly as in this world of writing books and creating content and all that. And but I did have a friend who have known forever. Up in that he would call what he would take what's called a radical sabbatical. And he would preach it, and this was like truly a sabbatical where he wasn't able to do it every year, and I think it was in his company he would actually like that was part of the perks. You'd get to take a couple weeks sabbatical.
Mm.
But he would take like a 6-week one, and it would be like up in New York or something, and just living differently. But it was then all of a sudden giving you space to make the connections and all that. Now, look, there's certain aspects that have to be in place for you to be able to do that. If you're running a company, you have to have the infrastructure for it to occur. But for me, it's the vacations, especially as kids are younger, have been about vacations. And as you know, with younger kids, vacations could be with younger kids is sometimes just as exhausting as not. And you never to take away from it, because if I think about these exhausting vacations I've taken, I would not. I feel privileged to be able to take them, and I would not exchange it for the whole world. As they become older, there's two things. One, from a work-life perspective, is important that you realize, how to use vacations. You stay connected with your older kids, because it's easy to be like, hey, they're older, they can do their own thing, but then you realize, how do you create space for that? But it does give you a little bit of time to reflect, think, read, whatever it is that you normally don't have time to. But yeah, I've never taken like the full blown, completely disconnected. So there was one time I did take I take that. I did have a summer where I did take a bit of a sabbatical. And this is when I was kind of trying to do a transition and figure out what I want to do. And that was pretty interesting, because I really explored agency models and did all that stuff. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm doing now that's based on taking basically a summer. And I do coach people that if they ever have an opportunity to transition roles, whether they decided to want to make a change, things change at their company, is that if they have the means to do so, take some time, because it is somewhat, if you have the means to do so, it is somewhat of a gift. And I think we're all hardwired to, if I'm not like producing a widget today, I must not be creating value. But taking that, if you have the ability to do so, taking some time to step back if you can, and understanding where things fit for you personally or strategically, I think that's important.
Yeah, I would say I've never been good at that. And I'll put a fine point on that. So from my history has been Spun Logic, Engage, Dragon Army. It's like the three companies I've been a part of. And when Spun Logic sold to become Engage, there's no private equity says, okay, we're going to pay you this money so that you can now, be part of what we're doing, and go ahead and take a month off at the beginning of that. Right. You're hitting the ground running harder than you were before. So then Engage was 5.5 years. And of course I took some vacations, but with the family, but never really a time in between those two companies. And then actually started Dragon Army technically two weeks before we sold Engage. So there was, literally an overlap. So I didn't take a break there. The best example I would have of time away was in 2018. We took our family to live in Edinburgh for a month.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I did very little Dragon Army work, although I was checking in. But, I wrote my first book on that trip. So it's not like I was really disconnecting. It was like I literally said, hey, this is the time I can write my book. So I think
you gave yourself space, though. I think that counts. I mean, because you gave yourself the space to, frankly, explore a different venture when you think about it. I would count that, unless you're like regretted it, which I don't think you do.
No, certainly I don't. No.
Here's the thing. I do think that if we jumping into this concept of sabbaticals and all that disconnecting, I think it's not about not doing anything. I think it's about changing your pattern of what you do daily, and I think you could deal within a vacation as well too. I mean, it's hard because vacation is about but I think you could. I think about, at least for me, I know it's different for everybody, and there's probably, believe it or not, a sabbatical expert someplace, that there's probably some definition for it. I think it is about giving yourself the space to focus on something that you traditionally cannot focus on. And I think that's very different for everybody. And it may not be about writing a book. It could be about just thinking, about being reflective. But I think the reflection aspect, which clearly writing a book is reflection. And look, as I go into this holiday period here in December, I'll probably take a little bit more of extended time to do it. And because of, frankly, we're not traveling the way we normally would over that time. it's going to allow me to really focus a lot more on writing, being more reflective and all that. So I would definitely count that. When I think of what that trip, because I remember you taking that trip, I put that, I would use as an example of a sabbatical, to be honest with you.
That's interesting, because I always think of sabbatical more like do you meditate? Do you do any sort of meditation?
I try to do some. I try to do some of it. Yeah.
Okay.
I need to meditate two meditates because I've been falling out of it. But yeah,
it's hard for me, and I never give it to really try it, and I sort of give myself a pass and say, well, when I'm running or I when I do yoga, that's sort of meditative. But I do know that a part of the principle is you sit down and you try to meditate, and you clear your mind, and then suddenly something pops up and you keep clearing your mind, and eventually you get to more of a sense of stillness, but you got to sort of push through that. In my mind, a true sabbatical is more like you're not really, quote unquote, doing anything, and it takes a few days to finally just start appreciating where you are and what you're doing, instead of thinking about the things that are waiting for you when you get back and so forth. So that's in my mind. I don't know why, but that's what I've always sort of pictured a true sabbatical. But I think you're right. I mean, definitely when I was on that month in Edinburgh, even though I was writing the book, it was a different type of thinking, a different type of doing. And I did come back refreshed and recharged, to go to work at Dragon Army.
And I think that's right. And I think it's different for everybody. And I think, if you start getting into these kind of, whether it's vacation or sabbatical, whatever the force structure is, because, obviously people are maybe limited on their vacation time. I think that element of disconnecting, I think where it gets difficult is, you have a lot of people who like to do the strategy of, vacation every, I'm going to take a bunch of long weekends or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think that's tough. One thing I learned early on, actually, it's interesting in two elements. One is when I was in financial services early in my career, actually I interned at a bank, and they actually had a policy that at a certain level, actually even I want to say even tellers, you had to take a 2-week vacation every year, back to back. And that had to do more with, that's how they break down patterns of fraud, right? Because if you're gone for 2 weeks, and if you're having a scheme, it gives them time to fall apart on you. So, but it was interesting because for some of these, and I don't know if they still do that in the financial services, but it kind of forced people to take a 2-week back-to-back vacation. And then when I was at GE, it actually was a big deal, particularly for officers. In July, actually, then it was August, and it started all the way back to the Jack Welch days. And I'm not saying they do that where he would take, time, in August, a couple of weeks. And of course, in the European, subsidiaries would, there's a lot more standards there, taking really extended periods of time in August. And then all of a sudden it came to this habit of, well, I'm going to take a couple of weeks. And I eventually shifted it, to July, but I got into this habit that in the middle of the year, at the end of the year, I need to take a few weeks. And something about that cycle of having a weekend, because I don't know how it is for you, Jeff, but for me, it takes several days to completely start deliberately disconnecting, where your brain starts going to the routines and starts shifting to either nothing or new things or really just being in the moment. So even that 1 week, I think you could get there. But I feel like when you kind of take that 2-week cycle and you get into that weekend and you're like, wow, I have a whole nother week left. And you could really, because to me, the ultimate refreshing is when you're coming back to work and you're like anxious to get back because you can't wait to get back. So how about you? Does it take you a little bit to kind of decompress your brain into as you go on vacation or whatever, or are you like, you're off and you're on to what you're doing on the trip?
Yeah, no. Definitely it takes time. I think for the first time, outside of the Edinburgh trip, I think for the first time, maybe last year, we did a two-week beach trip. And because it was always a week here, then back to work, then a week there. It really was like after 2 or 3 days, it finally my mind stopped racing about all the different things that needed to happen at the different businesses I'm involved in. And I think that's great if you can do it. I had always had friends who had done that. And so, and even then my mind doesn't turn off. it's impossible to do that, but the thinking does get differently and, a little more strategic. And so I'll be reading a book on, Abraham Lincoln, but I'll have a thought about the business. So I'll just quickly jot it down and then go back to the book.
And I think this is where just discipline in general comes in, to allow yourself. I mean, I think really when you start talking about disconnecting, whether it's for the night or whether it's for 6 weeks, it takes discipline. And I think because I have heard of people too who's like, I'm going to take a sabbatical, or I'm going to take 2 weeks, and then they're like on. The way I view it, their email patterns, everything is like the same as what were they were there.
They're still replying. Yeah.
And I don't know what your thoughts, but for me, a few things that I've done. One thing, I mean, there is a deliberacy of daytime where I will, the devices, I don't even know where I put my phone, which is probably good, but the devices are killers.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't use, I use text differently than I do email. So a lot of people who are able to text me, I don't mind if they interrupt me, on vacation, which is I think purposeful, versus I know some people use text like email, which to me, that's really hard if you're trying to escape, right? Because everybody's using your text. So, but there's certain tricks, like there's I mean, on your devices, you could switch, you could turn off your work email account.
That's right.
And I do have a personal email and work emails, and a couple of work emails. And there's, but that's that's one thing I definitely learned early on. I had some advice early on, all the way back to my GE days, where it's like, not even from a compliance standpoint, just for separation and for moments like that, where you could, you don't have to commingle. So I think that's a really important thing. But I think intentionality on disconnecting is important, starting with disconnecting from emails, starting to be deliberate when you're scheduled the time, and just being intentional in terms of creating space. I mean, do you have any tricks you do when you start trying to disconnect?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I use my personal email pretty much for everything. So
yeah, that's true. That is true. That is true.
So I don't stop checking it. I just, it's interesting. I think it's different for me for a couple of reasons. One, many years ago, I figured out how to get control of my schedule so that I wasn't burning both ends. So I've been able to focus on the things that only I can do, and so
that's true.
So my time's not insane, and like we've discussed, I love what I do. I don't. It's not like I'm working 80 hours a week and I hate my job, and so I'm like, I can't wait to decompress and get away. So, I mean, I probably should do it. It's just like everybody that I say, when I tell anyone that does meditate that I don't do it, they say you got to do it. So I'm sure that I should do a better job of totally disconnecting, but I just don't feel the need to. Because I love it. It's like super interesting to me what's happening at the company or the nonprofits and whatnot. So I don't think I have any good tricks other than, like I will put the phone away and just have the Kindle like that. That's one of the easiest things where like I can't be reading a book on my, on my Kindle and quickly check email, whereas you can.
But that's intentionality. That goes back to that intentionality. You make that intentional space. But one thing too, I would say as an entrepreneur, you do have a trick. And you have someone in your company that really is able to handle the day-to-day.
Definitely.
I mean, I think that's because I do believe, and I'll tell you a quick story. When I was at in my GE, as I started kind of growing up, kind of the ranks, going up the ranks there, and going to this. I may have told you this before, but going to one of their 3-week, leadership development programs. So literally, you would go from people from all over the world would go to what was Crotonville, New York, to their leadership center, and you would spend 3 weeks there back to back. You wouldn't leave on weekends or anything like that. And it was a privilege to be there. It's a really big deal, and they have several programs they do. I've done several of those, but I remember the first time going to it, they would talk about, said, hey, we're going to have pretty full days, and in terms of what you're going to do, so you need to set yourself up to disconnect from work, because your work is here now. And, everybody's like, yeah, I could do both. I could burn. But, they created the agenda in a way that you could not. And I remember those first few nights, and you're like trying to keep up. but what I quickly learned, and this I think was part of their intentionality of designing this way too, is that one, you're never that important. You're never that important, right? And two is how can you work and rely on your teams to do stuff? And I actually learned a lot about my teams. I'm like, wow, if I give this person more space, and this is where frankly I learned a lot about, the power of true delegation, not delegation like do this, but here's what we need done, and let someone else figure out what it is to do. And since then, it's really been this foundation of, that is a gift when you're given the ability to have space for yourself and have others be able to grow while you have that space too. It's a win-win for everybody.
Yep.
So I do think for you, I know in the way you've set up your company too, you do have people who are able to kind of run with it, and you don't have, and I'm sure you live and die by every deal out there, but you don't have to live and die by every minute from that deal out there because someone's taking care of it.
Definitely. And the times like even going to Edinburgh gave my team members more of a chance to step up. And of course they were capable. And so then when I came back, I just didn't pick up quite as much. But yeah, no, that's definitely a trick that I've learned that helps me quite a bit. But no, I think, what I'm going to take away from this is like, I think more intentionality, even though I have some things, more intentionality around sort of escaping a little bit, giving your mind a chance to sort of reset, if you will. I think that's probably going to be helpful for all the things that I'm involved in. But I know like you've got several things going, including this podcast, Disruptor Studio, like you've got lots of different things going. I'm guessing when you do like this next month and a half we've got a couple of holidays. I'm guessing when you take some time to relax, you probably will be thinking about some of these other things you're starting to build, right?
And this is, I think, intentionality too. Obviously, of course, we spend a lot of time with family now, but obviously there's an element of spending time with family and older kids, and which, you can't devalue at all. But, but to me, the deliberacy in this case, I've talked about the world famous book, the most famous book that hasn't been released yet, that I've, writing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and to be honest with you, this was inspired by your trip that you took to write your book, and in terms of taking some time over the winter break, and it kind of works out this year, but I'm being very intentional. I'm going to spend, those few weeks and have disciplined time. So this is what I mean. I think that when it gets to sabbatical or vacation, it doesn't have to be that you're not doing anything. It's being intentional about doing something that's out of your normal pattern on writing, and very focused on the book and very focused on content. That to me is my objective during this season. And especially because what is different is, as I mentioned before, normally we probably would be getting on a plane, going someplace.
Yeah.
And because of, not to say there might be not any little things, but it's just not going to be the same thing where, and as much as I bring our trusty laptop on trips, there's something about when you're seeing a beach outside for me to pull out the laptop and start writing that gets tough, because then I do want to explore and all that. So I think to me it's intentionality about writing, to be honest with you.
Love it.
So, well, good. Well, Jeff, well, this is good. And again, we do encourage everybody to find their own intention, find those tricks, give themselves permission to create space, figure out what your tricks are, and tell us what your tricks are to disconnect as well too. Hopefully you also heard here, as Jeff and I talked about, that that creating space is what you define it to be. It doesn't have to be floating. It doesn't have to be at every person's standard. And also having fun is okay too. So, escaping and doing a Netflix binge might be the thing you need as well.
That's right.
Or writing a book like Jeff did in 5 days or whatever he does.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with watching a few Netflix shows and just relax.
Exactly. Although I think right now everybody's kind of done with shows.
Yeah, for sure.
But anyway, so we hope everybody enjoyed this time. We hope you enjoyed the holidays. Enjoy your time with your family, and as we finish up 2020, we'll be talking to you definitely a few more times here for the remainder of the year. So we'll say our formal goodbyes to 2020 here in the coming weeks. But Jeff, good to see you again, and everybody, thanks for watching the Jeff and Alex podcast. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, your favorite podcast platform. And we'll be back at you every week with some great topics and amazing guests. See you soon.
See you soon, everybody.